Cool. So thank you guys for scheduling this walkthrough. I'm going to walk you through the whole Yield Protocol v2 code base. You both are familiar with the project, so I won't delve in that too much, but there's a bunch of code to go through, so it's going to be interesting. In terms of how I think that I should go through the code, I'm thinking in going through the base contracts, the dependencies first, things like the ERC20 contract we are using, AccessControl, all the things that are in the utilities folder, the oracles, all those things. And then when we have those components that we plug into, we go into accounting, which is the Cauldron, then the Ladle, which is the router, the liquidations engine, the pools, all that. Is that all right?
Sounds good. Another approach could also be to give us like a quick diff over what's changed in the protocol, like high level, and then we can kind of zoom in on each component.
Okay. So in terms of differences to V1, V1 had two separate sides to it, the collateralized debt engine, which was the controller and treasury, and it had yield space. In V2, yield space hasn't changed much. We have changed some functions to make them more gas efficient, but we have completely redone the collateralized debt engine, where yield V1 was completely permissionless, and it was a single collateral mostly and a single underlying. For yield V2, we have gone towards a MakerDAO approach where you can change anything via governance, and you can have in the platform itself, you can have multiple collaterals, an arbitrary number, as many as you want, and any number of underlyings as well. So yeah, basically we have gone from a simple, tiny, minimal collateralized debt engine to a fully mature one that can be used hopefully for many years in the future, maybe one. But yeah, that's the main difference between both systems. Okay. The move from completely permissionless to fully governance, from a single use case to multiple collaterals and underlyings. Okay. So explain like that didn't sound that difficult, and in general, it's unlike you guys did with Uniswap v3, that the whole paradigm was changed and everything was shaken, and now we have new things to play with. With Yield v2, we haven't really invented anything that amazing. We have taken everything that is out there that is now best possible use, the best practices, and we just have done things right with what is known right now. So all these patterns that you see used in Uniswap v3 and in many others, we have basically brought them in to have a mature product. With that said, I think I can go into the contracts, right? Good. Let's go. Yep. So I think I'm going to use the code that we sent to Code Arena because it's everything on one repo and it's easy to see. Let me see how I. Okay. Let me close all this. So I'm going to start with the utilities here. In the utilities, the important ones to look at are the ERC20.sol that we use, which is the DS token, but a little bit rewritten for to make it a little bit more compact. The only thing that it has that is a little bit unusual is the same as DS token. That, let me see, transfer. When you decrease the allowance in transfer from, it only does so if the person that is calling is not the owner of the token. So if I use transfer from with my own tokens, it doesn't check the allowance. And if the allowance is set to the maximum, it doesn't modify it. This saves a tiny bit of gas in some specific use cases without much pain. It diverts a little bit from the ERC20 standard, but we are not the first ones cheating on this, so it should be safe. ERC20 permit is the very same one that we used in GLV1, except that now we include a trick that we developed for WET10, so that it's actually resistant for forks. It's a very strange use case, but we found a way of doing it that had no gas consumption unless there is a fork. So why not? Basically, we only check the chain ID. Oh, am I looking at the right one? Okay, I need to change this because we are using a different one. Okay, fair enough. I copied the wrong version to Code Arena. I need to change that. Okay, access control. This is actually a very interesting contract that that we developed at the very beginning of the project. It is the same contract that I developed with Open Zeppelin, based on much earlier access control contracts that I had developed for other people. The interesting bit of it is that it organizes roles in trees. So you have roles that give permissions, and each role has an admin role. So you can basically have a tree of roles. You can have a root, and then under that root you can have department heads, and under that department, and each department head can have permissions to a series of things. That's something you can do if you feel like it. But in this version, we at the beginning, all that we have is a root role and a lock role, which are two trees in a way. And under the root tree, we have one permission for each function, which is the same as its signature. This means that any contract inheriting access control has already fine-grained permission over each function. And you have one account that can give whoever permission to execute each specific function without much pain and without much gas consumption. But it also has the log tree. The log tree is a role that has no members. Since it has no members, no one can actually change the permissions of any role under the log tree. So what you do is, if you want to lock a function, if you want to set the permissions of a function in stone, you just move it from the root tree to the log tree, and no one ever can change the permissioning. So we can use this for progressive decentralization. Imagine that, I don't know, at some point we are happy with the assets we have. We can lock the function that adds assets, and that bit has become completely permissionless. Or we can hand the permissions over to a DAO. Now only the DAO can do it. We can do plenty of those things.
Alberto, also just to make sure I understand, this is basically a more user-friendly, trimmed-down version of DS proxy. DS authority. Or a mix.
Probably. It's
Like
a little bit of a mix. DS authority already has the thing that it has a role for each function, which we use. The Open Zeppelin access control thing has the concept of admin roles, which are the ones that can grant permission for other roles. So we are combining both. Just because you have the permission to add assets doesn't mean that you also have the permission to allow others to add assets, for example. That is relegated to your admin.
Got it.
Okay. And the fact that we can use that to lock the permissioning of a function, I think is quite powerful, and it's something I would actually like to use in this journey towards decentralization. Okay, good. So those are the utilities that we should talk about. In terms of oracles, we have here in the walkthrough two multi-oracles, which are just oracle bridges, the same as many others have done. There are oracles with many different formats. You have Chainlink, you have Uniswap v3, you have many others. So we just created a bridge that can connect between the sources that are set, that might come in any format, to the format that we offer to our contracts. This is quite a regular thing. The only difference is that our bridge contracts can hold several sources at the same time, which saves us on costs. And that's about it. One interesting thing is that we have also rate and chi oracles that use the same format as the spot oracle. So the spot oracle will give you the price between ETH and DAI, for example. The chi oracle might give you the price between DAI and chai. So we also take advantage of that to use a common oracle interface for whether it's spots or rates, and that's useful. Not much more to go here. I'm not going to go into the Uniswap v3 oracle, but we have it already. It's just not in the code arena thing.
Cool.
Cool. So that's for utilities and oracles. In terms of math, I have a bunch of libraries here, which is just fixed point math. I took all this from USM-FAM. Jacob Eliosov rewrote everything I had done with fixed point math and made it much better. So I just took it. And functions to cast between types. That's all.
It's amazing that Solidity does not let us do this natively.
I was in a discussion with the people that were trying to do it, and the thing is that you are coding for something that is like a handheld calculator, and this can be quite intensive. So it's not Solidity really. Solidity could allow it, but it might imply a certain amount of gas that we don't want to deal with, and it's.
I mean, you could have them as compile time checks that then get discarded.
Possibly. Maybe soon. I know that there is the will. The Open Zeppelin guys have been talking about that for quite a while, and the Solidity guys were also in the same conversation. So maybe it will happen. Okay, so I think we can move on to the vault contracts. Taking the same path from dependencies, first I'm going to talk about the join. The join is very similar to the joins in MakerDAO. They just hold assets, ERC20 assets, or possibly ERC721 or whatever.
Does this?
Yeah.
Sorry, Alberto. Does this work? Does the vault support rebasing tokens?
I actually don't. I haven't experimented with that. I know that this is not decentralized in the sense of Uniswap that anyone can add a rebasing token.
Right. Mm-hmm.
So we would very carefully look before adding one. I honestly don't know.
Okay, got it.
The difference between our joins and those from MakerDAO is that in MakerDAO, the user sends the assets to the join or calls the join to pull the assets from himself. And in our contract, the join and the exit, taking assets from the user and giving assets to the user, are permissioned functions. So we are the ones calling that. That reduces the number of transactions and reduces the amount of gas used. It also increases the risk of a governance attack. So it's a trade-off that we decided to take the chance of the governance attack. So we will be truly paranoid with governance. And that's also why I want to go the path of full decentralization because and permissionlessness, because that reduces our risks of a governance attack, which would be tragic. One fun thing in the join is that we took a leaf of the Uniswap v2 book, and the joins actually keep track of their own internal balances, the same as the Uniswap pools. So if someone has already sent something to the join and then calls join, the join will check the internal balances and it will just adjust the internal balance instead of moving more assets. Why are we doing this? Because that way we can chain many actions. We can have one action that produces one asset and instructs that action just to leave it on the join. And then when next we call an action that takes assets from the join, it will already be there. So that's how we become very, very gas effective.
So the gas effectiveness comes from the fact that you don't check storage variables each time, but you check the relative changes in the balance.
The gas efficiency comes from the fact that we only move assets the very minimum amount of times. If you are buying dye from a pool and then you want to add that dye to pay your debt, for example, you will ask the pool to leave the dye directly in the join. And once it gets in the join doesn't need to move it again. Instead of, as we did in V1, that you would instruct the pool to sell you some dye that would go in the ladle, and then it was the controller or the proxy. Then you would call the proxy to put that dye somewhere else. So we are reducing the number of hops for each token.
Nice.
And apart from that, we added, because why not? We added flash loans to the joins, because by now that's something that is not so difficult to do. They are initially disabled, but yeah, from the start, we can offer flash loans of any assets we hold. That's it. That's the join. We deploy the joins through a join factory.
So, Alberto, on the join, can you go back to the flash? Do you need to, how do you enable an asset? Because I think that asset is already set as a storage variable.
Yeah.
But maybe for some vaults, maybe you don't want to have flash loans enabled.
Yeah. So
should there be a flash?
They are disabled by. I think that they are disabled or will be disabled from the get-go by setting the fee to a ridiculously high value that makes the loan fail.
Okay. So you disable them by making the fee very high.
Yeah.
Does that work?
Yeah, that's what we are going to do. Here it actually is set to 0 initially, but I'm going to set it. I have to remember that this will be initially set to. This will be initially set to int 256 max. So with that, no one will be able to do a flash loan until we actually set the fee to something lower. I'm going to set it there.
That's smart because we save an S store.
Yeah, that's how we do things, right?
Or an S load.
Yeah, in general, we have always taken the approach in GILT v2 to save as much gas as we can. In GILT v1, we had huge problems from the amount of gas we were using. So for v2, gas is king. Okay, so that's the join. Next is the FYToken, which is very much the same. It's very similar to the one we had in v1. The FYToken is a token that at maturity can be redeemed for the underlying. The differences to v1 is that now the FYToken knows about the oracle itself, so it can ask itself for the chi rate. If the chi rate is when there is a savings rate applied to the redemption value. Before in v1, you had to tell the FYToken how much underlying to give someone on redemption. Now you don't have to do that. Now the FYToken is self-contained. If someone redeems their FYTokens and there is a savings rate that needs to be applied, the FYToken will know about it. And it will do it here. It will get from the oracle for the underlying, it will get the chi rate normalized at a rate of 1 ether. That's one thing that we changed. Another thing we changed that I think is quite important is that now FYTokens self-mature. Before, someone had to be at midnight, often me, at midnight of the maturity date, and it scan prepared to click the button and mature. And if I was too late, someone would lose some gas. And now the first person that actually tries to redeem here, when they calculate the accrual of the chi, if it hasn't been set, the chi at maturity, which is set at this to save gas. If the accrual of the chi hasn't been set, the first redemption will do so. So the FY token this time, they self-mature, which will save us some trouble. So we have
and for the chi, what is that in cases other than DAI, like Phi DAI?
So far, I think we are going to use the compound C tokens as a source of chi. We take the borrowing rate. I can show you actually on the compound.
Is that manipulatable by any chance?
It can be manipulated by them, I reckon, but we can also change.
I mean, if somebody did a huge borrow, for example, would that increase the rate that you would read?
Well, it increases the interest rate on compound, but the chi only should be rising at relatively modest rate, because that's the rate of increase of chi.
Yeah, it's a cumulative factor, so it's not like a spot price that can go up and down. The chi can only go up. So to make it go up by a lot, they would have to be quite brutal.
Right, and so if Phi DAI or Phi whatever is earning chi and interest, and then the borrowers are paying chi, what if there's an imbalance between the borrow and lending amount after maturity?
You mean in our platform?
Yeah.
So everything is governance driven in this in GIL-v2. So we will monitor the platform to make sure that the expected amount of redemptions can be served by the assets that we have in the joins, and we will take action to rebalance. First, probably manually, but then we will also implement a strategy so that it can be done automatically.
Right. So, but isn't it possible that the system becomes insolvent then because if it's paying too much in interest, and it isn't earning that in interest from any borrowers? Like if all the borrowers repay immediately, how does the system? How does the system continue to pay interest to the lenders?
Those are some numbers that we run already for GIL-v1. Is no different, and we get their collateral immediately, and we only pay the savings rate after maturity. So we have a buffer of time there in which to build our reserves, so that we don't, so that the protocol is revenue positive.
Sorry, doesn't Aave and Compound have like the LTV ratio, which beyond that does not let you borrow more? So can we also have like some sort of extra limit?
I don't know. You're asking me on a lot of financial things, and I'm a code monkey. So
actually,
you should ask Dan. Dan is the one that would know the answer to that question.
I should ask Alan. I'm realizing because I'm forgetting how this works exactly, even in V1. But cool. Okay, we can keep going.
Cool. So I just take Alan as the source of all financial information. If Isis is right, I am no one to argue. Okay, going back to the FYToken. So we can redeem, and it's self-contained on the redemption amount and in the integration with the Oracle. Minting and burning is permissioned. As for V1, only our contracts that are allowed to create them can mint and burn FY tokens. The FY token, the same as the join, it tracks its own internal balances, so that you can send FY token as a result of some operation to the FY token contract itself. And when you go to redeem, it will find that it has FY token in there and redeem and burn them inside instead of moving them. To do that, we just check our own balance, the balance of the FYToken. The FYToken shouldn't hold any FYtokens itself. So if it has any, it's because someone has sent them there. If you send your FYtoken, you better burn them on the same transaction, or some bot will do it for you. And I need to remove this unchecked here. And as always, the FYtokens can also be flash minted, as they could be for V1, this time for no fee, in the same fashion that we used for V1. That was very useful. I found it less useful this time because since we can do anything through governance, I can make my own internal flash loans, just grabbing stuff from the joins, doing whatever, and then returning it. But maybe it will be useful to have flash loans in the future. We found them immensely useful in V1. It's only that they are more expensive with regards to gas than using some governance private pathway. And of course, now we are ERC3156 compliant everywhere, because why not? Cool. So those are the FYtokens and the joins. Just before I move on to the accounting, I'm going to show you the data structures, because now is when they come important, which should be here somewhere, but I don't even remember where. Interfaces, vault, data types, here they are. So a big part of how we saved gas with V2 was with pretty intensive data packing. Each one of these structs is one word. We don't use structs of more than one word, because we saw with Uniswap v3, sometimes the compiler doesn't do what we think it does, and it reads or writes the whole struct instead of just the word that it needs. So all our structs are just one word. And the basic pattern is that we have an address, and then on the 12 bytes that remain, we pack some other stuff, either two identifiers for an asset and a series, or we pack the collateralization ratio, or in the case of debt, we pack the total debt and the debt limits. In the case of the series, we pack the FYtoken, the ID of the underlying, and the maturity. And in the case of balances, we keep both balances, the debt and the collateral, also in the same struct, so that we are always loading one word and writing one word. And we often write more than one value. So that saves us a good amount of gas. And I think all of these are the ones that you will see in Cauldron. Cauldron is the accounting system, and is the one that has plenty of storage included. Okay. So Cauldron records the data of the system. All the other contracts are quite self-contained. The join is self-contained, the FYtoken is self-contained, the Ladle is a router, the liquidation engine just does one thing. This keeps all the data. The Cauldron is critical in the sense that it's the only contract that we cannot upgrade. It's there forever. We can change any other contract, but not the Cauldron. This is going to be there forever. So we need to be quite sure that this contract is safe. The way that we have tried to limit the risk is by making sure that the Cauldron doesn't make external calls as much as possible. The only external calls it does is to oracles, the rate oracles and the spot oracles, to get a value. That's the only thing it does. It doesn't have any other dependencies. And all the methods, all the functions in the Cauldron, they are all permissioned. There are no public functions for anyone to call. The only way of calling something in the Cauldron is by having been authorized beforehand to do it. So if you want to hack the Cauldron, you need to hack something else first. Okay, so in the Cauldron, we have assets, which could be underlying or base or collateral, ilk. We have reused a number of terms from MakerDAO. You can have series, which is an FYToken that has a maturity date. You can have ilks. Ilks are assets. So ilks are assets that we accept as collateral. So we might accept an asset as an underlying, is something that we lend. We could accept this as a collateral, is something that we accept as a guarantee that you will repay your debt. We have rate oracles for each
Alberto,
base.
why is it the nested mapping and not just one level?
In the ilks.
Oh, because it's per series.
No, it's because it's per underlying.
Per underlying.
No, it's per series. It's per series. Sorry, it's per series. It's per series. You're right.
Okay.
Yeah. So for FYDAI, we accept as collateral USDC, Ether, and whatever else. Spot oracles are for base and underlying and collateral pair. Rate are for underlying. The debt is also for underlying and collateral. We have a debt limit for borrowing DAI with Ether, for example, that has its own sailing limit and its own dust limit, and the same for each pair. These ones I can skip. The vaults and the balances, these together are actually the vaults themselves. This is the user data. So these two mappings together are these two structs together, which I can call a vault itself, which has an owner, it has a series, it has a collateral, it has an amount of debt, it has an amount of collateral. They are single collateral vaults. So basically I create a vault to put Ether to borrow DAI, for example. If I need to put USDC to borrow DAI, then I open a separate vault. And each one can be liquidated independently, for example, and they can also be merged with other vaults of the same series and collateral. So you can manipulate them. You can own many vaults. It's what MakerDAO did at a later stage with the CDP manager to give more flexibility to what they were doing. We are just taking that lesson and doing it from the get-go. And we have auctions and auction interval, which are therefore the liquidations. This is basically just the time at which an auction started, so that we can have several liquidation engines working in parallel in the platform. And once a liquidation engine grabs a vault to liquidate it, it has a grace period in which to liquidate it. If it hasn't, for example, in 3 hours, then other liquidation engines can come and grab it. So we can do A/B testing of liquidations. Cool. We have a bunch of governance functions, adding assets, setting debt limits, setting rate oracles, setting the auction interval, setting the spot oracle, adding series, adding ilks. All of these, they're supposed to do, they are all governance actions. So we do some checks that things will work, and then just put some data into the system. They don't have much magic into it. They only need to be executed in a certain order, because in order to add a series, you need to have the asset first, for example. So it just does the checks that it does things in that order. Then we have abstracted this. We have our governance router in a way, because really we only want to do a couple of actions, which is adding assets either as an underlying or collateral, and then adding series. That's all we do, actually. So this just gets combined later on. Governance section, vault management section. Users can create vaults, can destroy vaults if they want to recover the gas while you still recover gas for erasing data. You can change the vault. If a vault has no debt, then you can change the series. So for example, I can have a vault to borrow DAI with Ether. If I have no DAI debt, I can change it to borrow USDC with Ether. So it saves a little bit of gas for the users if they want to do that. Or
so Alberto, I can move from one vault type to another with just one storage variable update.
Yes,
Nice.
you can do that. As long as your...
If I have zero debt.
Yeah, exactly. But we use that, for example, as well to roll debt, because rolling debt means that you keep the same collateral, Ether, but instead of borrowing DAI to be returned in June, you want to borrow DAI to be returned in September. So what we do is to internally erase your debt, change your vault, create your new debt. So that saves gas again.
Right.
You can give vaults to other people. Here it is, my CDP. You can make an NFT and sell it on OpenSea with your debt. I think that someone is planning to sell vault number 1 from MakerDAO or CDP number 1 from MakerDAO. Okay. And moving into asset and debt management, what would be about adding and collateral, removing collateral, debt, and so on. The first one is stir. I love the Chinese naming. Stir is a bit of a combination of a few functions in MakerDAO. It basically allows to move collateral and debt between different vaults. So I can give you my debt. I can give you my collateral, or you can take my debt, because we need to do things with the correct permissioning. If both vaults are mine, then I can move more or less at will, as long as everything remains collateralized. The funny part is that I can, for example, I have a vault, I can create a new vault, and I can move part of the collateral and debt. So I can fork. I can also have 2 vaults with the same collateral and debt. Well, I can move all the stuff to one and then destroy one. So I can also merge. So with Stir, I can move collateral and debt, I can fork, I can merge. It's pretty cool. We are getting to the end of the Cauldron. We have Pour, which is FROB in MakerDAO. Pour adds and removes collateral, adds and removes debt.
Is Pour redundant with Stir?
No, because Stir keeps the debt and collateral amounts constant. Doesn't bring any new collateral.
I see. Right. But
So
couldn't you do anything you can do with Stir by pouring out and then pouring back in?
You could combine a Pour and a Stir if you would want. If you want to, for example,
I mean, couldn't you, anything you could do with Stir, you should be able to do by Pour, pull stuff, and then Pour, put stuff back in?
It would get more complicated, and complicated means also risky. Pour works on just 1 vault. Stir works in 2 vaults. So that's merging both would be probably possible, but instead of having 2 rather large functions, you would have 1 huge function. So no. And we use Pour a lot all the time, and I haven't found a single use for Stir yet in the platform.
Do you think it's needed then?
Yeah, because I use the similar functions in MakerDAO. So I think that the people that integrate with us will want to use it. Pour does exactly the same as FROB in MakerDAO. It changes the collateral and debt levels, checks limits, checks dust. That's it. It's only done in a way that we try to do one SS store for the balances, and that's it. So when you are adding collateral and adding debt and doing all that, is one SS store only, which is good. And we take the same approach. When you are checking debt limits with one S load, you will check the ceiling and the dust at the same time. So that's cool. We have 2 functions here. We have grab and slurp. which are used for the witch, the nasty lady that runs the liquidations. Basically, the witch can take under collateralized vaults to liquidate them, and through the ladle, it can change the balances in a vault without checking for collateralization, but only reducing them. It's risky, but I actually checked the MakerDAO contracts and they have exactly the same risk. A malicious liquidations engine can bring the whole house down. So we have the same thing. It's one of the parts that I'm less happy about the whole platform, to be honest, but given that they didn't find a better solution, I didn't find a better solution either. Maybe that's something for V3 if someone comes up with a good way of doing it, or maybe in the hacking contest, someone will come with something.
Well, I mean, can you have Grab at least have to repay the debt before it can pull the collateral?
You could put conditions. You could put conditions on how this happens, but the problem is that once you actually have access to this function, I just found so many ways of draining everything that there was no point in actually putting extra conditions that would only make you feel safe without actually adding any security. So at least it's clear there to see what can happen.
Right.
So,
yeah. I mean, yeah. At least my instinct would be like, well, this might be too restrictive, but to say that like liquidations can only repay. I mean, maybe this is something that could be added in like the liquidation contract as like another check. But is that it can only actually grab if it would repay the debt. So at most, you won't make the protocol insolvent. You'll just sort of make it. You'll just take someone's margin. But
yeah,
I think it's
I'm happy to review these functions, to be honest. I know that they work, and I know the security risks of them. If we come up with a better way of doing them, we should tell the MakerDAO guys as well. Okay, that's for liquidations. Rolling debt is a very complex thing to do, and we had to put it straight into the Cauldron because it's quite a hard thing to do. So that's what this thing does. It basically allows to change the vault balances to a new series and a new debt. Basically is that. And then we have the whole level mature accrual chunk, where MakerDAO has a quite simple function to determine if a vault of theirs is collateralized. We have a slightly more complex function because we have to consider whether it's before maturity, after maturity, what's the spot, and what's the rate. So that's all done through level, which actually does that, gets the spot price, gets the spot price, and then somewhere it gets the accrual. Yes, it gets the accrual, which the same as in the FYToken. If a series hasn't matured, but is after maturity, it will record the rate to kind of self-mature at the Cauldron, right? So this is a hefty chunk, but once you start pulling the threads, it's not so bad. It's just that it self-matures a series in the Cauldron by recording the rate at that maturity date. And it calculates the function, which I should have something here so that is clear, which is spot times inc must be bigger than art times rate times accrual. Oof. So that's it. Is it clear? The Cauldron is a hefty accounting system that was done trying to optimize for gas as much as possible and trying to shift in the risks towards a governance-led pattern. If we are careful with the governance, it will be fine. Yeah. Cool. Should I move on to the Ladle?
Yep.
Sure.
Cool. By the way, with the naming, if I would have got my way, instead of volts, we would have bubbles, so that we would have a cauldron full of bubbles that we steer with the ladle. Would be fun.
Amazing.
I could still do it. Very
Out makering maker. That's pretty funny. You've gone full name.
Well, once we go this route, why not go all the way through? Okay, the ladle. The ladle is like the Uniswap. Is a combination of the Uniswap router with whatever Furu combo uses to act on the cauldron and on the joins and on the pools. So basically, it is the riskiest contract because it's the entry point for everyone. It's complex and has access to everything. So in the hacking contest, I'm trying to draw as much attention as I can to this contract so that it gets lots of eyes on it. On the positive side, it barely has any storage. The only storage it has is registries of which joins and pools are in the system. Okay. So at least that is that. It doesn't keep any data about users. It doesn't keep any data about accounts. Doesn't keep any data about anything else. And in the terms of internal pathways, it tends to be something calls the ladle and the ladle calls something else. There is not complicated pathways where the ladle calls this and the ladle and then this and then this and then this. It tends to be quite linear. But to balance that out, we have the batching mechanism. So this is the administration of the registries, just keeps the joins and the pools. This is for getting them. This is for setting them. So you can add joins and pools. I haven't talked about the pools, but they are like Uniswap pools where you trade between an underlying and an FYToken. I will get into them. So yeah, this is administration of the ladle by adding and retrieving pools and joins. I can skip them. I will go into modules later. And we have batch. We could have used multicall as Uniswap v3, but we decided instead to implement a massive switch instead, because it saves us, we think it saves us on gas. We might still change this to multicall if we discover that the gas savings are not worth it, because it's a massive chunk of code. Basically, as you did with DYDX, you encode the data for an operation and you encode a numeral for the operation. So you can say, okay, so I want to do a pour with this data, then I want to do a stir with this data, then I want to destroy a vault with this data, then I want to do this with this data. And you combine a series of actions together. This way, we can offer a lot of features in a small package, in a relatively small package. In the 600 lines of the ladle, I think we have, I don't know, you have seen the cookbook. There are like 20 different actions you can take, which are quite complex. Does this massive thing, which in reality is not that complicated, is go through the operations, see what the operation it is, get the parameters out, and call the private function that implements it. All this chunk is to avoid external calls, which is what you use in Uniswap. I reckon that Uniswap doesn't chain so many of them. We have several actions that is 4 or 5 or 6 calls all together. Also, while we are doing that, we cache the vault. Many of these functions you operate on the same vault. So we read it once and then pass that struct along so that we don't have to go to the Cauldron to retrieve the vault for each action. Saves gas again. That's the batching. And then there's a bunch of functions here that I don't think I can go through each one. They are the ones that just interface to the Cauldron to allow users to manage their vaults, to give them, to tweak them, to build and destroy them. something to connect to stir, something to pour, which is what you do to deposit collateral and borrow. Now we're getting fancy. Serve. In serve, you deposit your collateral, but you borrow straight to a yield space pool. And then from that yield space pool, you trade and get the underlying. So you are putting collateral and borrowing underlying instead of borrowing the FYToken. We did this in V1, but it was super expensive. Now it's super cheap. We can pay with debt with underlying, which now we don't need to implement a specific action in the Cauldron. We just do it. We have many ways of repaying. We can repay with base by selling it in a pool, sending the result straight to the FYToken. And when we call, it will be burned for the FYToken. So I can repay my DAI debt with DAI, and it will get exchanged very cheaply in the pool. We could do this in V1, but it was super expensive. We have two ways of repaying: one to repay a fraction of your vault, one to repay your whole vault, because the mechanics are slightly different in order not to leave change somewhere. We can roll debt. Rolling debt is very complex because not only you have to change the debt and the series of a vault, you have to do it according to what the yield space pools tell you. And to do that, you actually have to do a trade in a pool. So this just organizes the same thing. Again, using that kind of token jumping mechanism that minimizes the number of tokens that we move around. We have some functions that I created yesterday to be able to remove liquidity that you have put into the yield space pool after maturity and then use that to redeem or to repay. These are just blocks, bricks that we use to do different things. This is a function I don't like, but we needed it. This is for the witch to be able to move the assets when liquidating. I do not like it. Ideally, the witch would have permissions to each separate join, but I would be quite concerned that we would mess up with the governance and forget to give permission to the witch to one specific asset and only discover when those assets need to be liquidated and we bring the whole house down. So instead of that risk, anything that the ladle has access to, the witch has access to. If we find a better way of doing it, we can replace the ladle, we can replace the witch. But yeah, I don't like this, and I've marked it as a concern in the hacking contest to see if someone finds how to abuse it. And now we have a few utility functions to execute permits, ERC20 or DAI permits, to wrap or unwrap Ether with 9 for now, maybe with 10, we'll see. To send stuff at tokens to pools and to execute anything on a pool, which is relatively safe because the pools can only do very limited things, and we actually don't execute in any random address. We have somewhere else that you actually pass an ID, so you will only execute random functions on known pools. So this would be extremely unsafe if it would be on naked addresses, but being on known pools, it's safe. We have blocks to transfer assets to FYTokens and redeem, and you just put all these blocks together. It's so much fun. And last, in the ladle, we have modules. Modules are contracts that we can deploy, that we can permission the module to execute things on. So if we need more blocks in the future, we can deploy a module, we can permission the Ladle to execute a function in that module via delegate call. And that way we extend the Ladle. Again, with a governance attack, we would be screwed. But if we are safe with governance, this is safe. And also, if we find that this is not safe, we can use the access control thing to lock the function and disable all modules forever. So that's it. The Ladle, as I said, is complex, is powerful, and therefore risky. But so far, I haven't seen any obvious vulnerability, and no one has found it. So let's see what the hacking contest comes with. All those contracts are the vault. That's the collateralized debt engine. With regards to yield space, I won't need to
sorry,
go too far into it.
Alberto, I have to drop, unfortunately.
Yeah, obviously.
Thank you for the walkthrough. I'll take a look at the rest of the
Cool.
code.
Yeah. We could do a separate walkthrough maybe on yield space.
Yeah, exactly. Because this has been 1 hour for the collateralized debt engine. Then we can do a shorter one for yield space. So thanks for listening to me for a whole hour while I go on about this.
Very nice. I think you've out-makered Maker with the code style. It's pretty impressive.
Ooh, I'm not sure. There's some big words in there. We'll see. But thanks.
You gotta keep compressing them. Only 4 letters. Yes. But yeah, no, it's I think the metaphor is great.
Okay.
Yeah, well done.
Cool.
It's a beautiful code base.
Thank you very much. It means a lot.
All right.
Thank you, guys.
See you guys.
See you.